Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Today we've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My husband Mark and I had just celebrated our second wedding anniversary, and I had been feeling grateful for the simple joys of life. However, things took a bizarre turn when my mother Linda moved in with us after her divorce. She needed a fresh start, and we were happy to help at first. Having my mother around was a blessing. We shared laughs over dinners and spent evenings reminiscing about the past. Mark adored her, and her presence seemed to strengthen our family. Our little family grew, but as the weeks turned into months, we noticed a strange tension in our household. My stepbrother Jake, who was living with my mother, often came over to visit. He was charming and funny, but there was something about our dynamic that felt off. One fateful evening while Mark was working late, Jake came over for a casual hangout. We watched movies, shared popcorn, and reminisced about our childhood. It was innocent fun until the conversation took a strange turn. Jake, emboldened by the dim light and our carefree spirits, joked. He asked if I remembered the time we got into trouble for sneaking into the pool late at night. I laughed, recalling how we had nearly gotten caught as the night wore on. The atmosphere shifted, the jokes became flirtatious, and I found myself enjoying the attention. I hadn't realized how lonely I felt. I realized how lonely I felt with Mark, often preoccupied with work. The line between playful banter and something more started to blur, and before I knew it, I was leaning closer to Jake, our laughter mingling with an unspoken tension. Suddenly, the laughter faded as Jake looked. He looked into my eyes with a seriousness that made me shiver. I felt a magnetic pull, and before I could think, our lips met. The kiss was intense, igniting a passion I had buried deep within myself. In the haze of desire, we lost ourselves in the moment, forgetting all boundaries and consequences. Things escalated quickly. I knew it was wrong, but the thrill was intoxicating. We found ourselves in a whirlwind of hidden moments and stolen kisses. Each encounter felt like a guilty secret that bonded us closer. But the excitement of our secret relationship started to feel like it was about to explode. Then one day everything changed. My mum had gone out shopping and Jake had come over to watch a game. We started off innocently enough, but soon passion took over. I found myself in a compromising position with my heart racing and the door locked. I didn't think twice as I surrendered to the moment, forgetting about the world outside. But life has a way of crashing in. My mother returned home earlier than anticipated, her keys jangling in the hallway as she called out for us. I was caught off guard. Panic coursed through my veins, and the reality of our situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I quickly pushed Jake away and scrambled to straighten myself out as my mom burst into the living room. She was visibly shocked. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she took in the scene. Time seemed to freeze as I stood there mortified, desperately searching for an explanation that would never. "What on earth is going on here?" she exclaimed, her voice a mix of anger and disappointment. Jake stammered out some excuse, but I knew it was too late. The truth was out, and the gravity of our actions weighed heavily in the air. My mother's expression turned from shock to fury, and I felt the world around me crumble. She was not just angry, she was heartbroken. "How could you do this? This is beyond unacceptable." The confrontation escalated, and in my frantic attempt to salvage the situation, I made it worse. I tried to explain how it all happened and how in that moment I felt like I was losing control. My mother was clearly disappointed and betrayed. She had spent years building trust with me, and I had just shattered it. She stood with her hands on her hips, and I could see the anger and hurt in her eyes. She said she would tell Mark everything. It was a threat, and it scared me. I couldn't imagine my husband learning about my betrayal. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. That moment made me realize I was in a tricky situation. I pleaded with my mom, desperate, feeling like I was clawing at my throat. I said, "You can't do that, it was a mistake, I'm weak." I told her I loved Mark, and that I'd face the consequences. "This isn't just about you anymore. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel the walls closing in. I glanced at Jake, who seemed equally terrified. We both knew we had crossed a line, but now it felt like a chasm we couldn't bridge. I was lost in a whirlpool. I was flooded with a range of emotions, including fear, regret, and guilt. I realized that I might lose everything I held dear. My mother suddenly left the room, leaving me and Jake in a suffocating silence. I turned to him, tears brimming in my eyes, and asked, "What have we done?" He looked just as devastated, shaking his head in disbelief. He said quietly, "I never meant for it to get this far." The hours that followed were torturous. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. I could picture Mark's face, his shock, his heartbreak, the betrayal. I could see it in his eyes. I was so guilty I could barely breathe. I paced the living room, trying to figure out how to salvage the pieces of my shattered life. My mother returned, her demeanor colder than before. "I've thought about it, and I won't tell Mark yet," she said, her tone icy. "But you need to understand the gravity of what you've done if you think you can continue this twisted relationship. You need to cut ties with Jake and focus on your marriage." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly drowned by the I knew my mother was right. I had to put an end to this before it got out of hand, but how could I face Jake? The bond we had formed felt too strong to simply cut off. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself for the difficult conversations ahead. "Mom, I'll end things with Jake. I can't lose Mark. I love him too much. I promised I'd stay calm, but I'll figure this out on my own." With a nod, my mother seemed to soften slightly, though the disappointment lingered in her eyes. "You better mean it. I'll be watching," she warned before leaving me alone with my thoughts. The following days were a blur of confusion and heartache. I avoided Jake as best as I could, feeling both a sense of loss and relief. But every time I saw him, the connection we had shared echoed in my mind, tormenting me. I wrestled with the memories of our stolen moments, and the thrill that had drawn me to him in the first place. Eventually I mustered the courage to confront Jake. We met at a secluded park, the trees casting shadows over our nervous faces. I said, "Keep doing this, it's wrong and I can't let it ruin my life with Mark." Jake looked defeated. The spark that once lit his eyes had gone out. He said, "I never wanted it to come to this. But I can't just turn off my feelings." I felt guilty. We talked for hours, laying bare our fears and regrets. We both knew that the only way forward was to part ways, with tears in my eyes. I promised to cherish the memories, but to put my marriage first. I felt a mix of relief and sorrow when I got home. I knew I'd made the right decision, but it still weighed heavily on my heart. Mark came home that night, blissfully unaware of the storm that had nearly destroyed everything. We shared a quiet dinner, and I forced myself to smile, pushing aside the lingering guilt. But my mother's warning haunted me. I had to stay vigilant, ensuring that the secret remained buried. He's turned into weeks, and while life slowly returned to normal, the shadow of that day loomed large. I found solace in Mark's laughter and warmth, yet the I still felt a bit betrayed. But as time passed, I learned to navigate my guilt and rebuild trust with my husband. I promised myself that I would never let temptation cloud my judgment again. I had faced the consequences of my actions, but I knew that the lessons learned would stay with me forever, shaping the way I approached love and fidelity. I knew that my mother could always expose my secret, but I held on to hope. I had made it through the storm, and while the scars would remain, I was determined to create a brighter future with my husband. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time.